You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing. Creator and host, Ken Vellante. Editor and producer, Peter Bauer.
Hey everybody, this is Ken Vellante with the Something Rather Than Nothing podcast. Super excited to have Elisabeth Eaves. And Elisabeth, I'm gonna drop it right off to you at the beginning. You got a novel, The Outliers, which I've just listened to on Audible. I loved it. It was a thrilling, exciting read. It was so smart, and I just thoroughly enjoyed the experience. But I just wanted to, how's it going with your new book of fiction?
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on. I'm very excited to chat with you. I think this is going to be fun. My novel, The Outlier, as you said, it just came out. It came out in August. So for, all those authors out there, they know, but that can be a really busy and high anxiety time. So, I went through all that. I had a bunch of events and still doing scattered events, although it's a little slower now. And in the last few weeks, I've been able to get back to writing, which of course is, what I love to actually do. Although, I find events fun. I like doing the Q&A and interacting with the audience. It's the organization of it though is kind of high intensity sometimes. So yeah, it's been going great. Little quieting down a little in a nice way, but it was a fun month.
Yeah, one of the things I like about doing the show is I end up coming in contact and reading different type of things, and I was surprised in just reading your book about the range of things that it covered. I mean, we had the science in there, talking about coral reefs. It was mystery related to that, highly intelligent, complicated characters. So I was like, whoa, this is all in here. About so where does this come from for you? This kind of wide ranging, even international aspects of of a thrilling story. So where did it all come from?
Yeah. So for me, I think novels come together in layers. So I might know, I might have a character idea, but not a setting, or I might have a theme idea, but not the character. So on kind of a structural level, that's how it comes together. As far as the topics and themes, I think I just kind of put in a whole lot of things I was fascinated with or that I had some experience with. So one of the themes, as you know, is essentially brain science. We have a character who is technically a psychopath, but she's kind of a pro-social psychopath. She is not, the killer of pop culture fame. She is someone who's very aware of her condition and has many of the traits of psychopathy, kind of a, lack of empathy and a calculating quality. But she's also very successful, and, she's become a very controlled person to kind of stay disciplined and keep those things in check. So there's her grappling with her psychopathy and the people around her. And then there's, there's kind of an Alzheimer's strain. So there's that whole kind of, neurological, how do people work, what makes them kind of who they are as far as the brain goes side of it. And that was from real world things that I read about or heard about. There was a memoir by a guy named James, I think James Denton, called The Psychopath Inside. And he was a neuroscientist who one day was looking at a bunch of brain scans and of criminals, terrible criminals, rapists and murderers. And the brain of people who are psychopaths, it looks a little different. There are parts of it that are, shrunken amygdala is one of the things. And like they fire a little differently. So he has this stack of brain scans. And then somehow he was also doing like some personal genealogical project. And he came across this one like criminal brain scan, and he was like, which one is this? Which subject is this? Well, long story short, it turned out to be his own, but it looked
Wow.
like all the psychopath brains, and so that set him off on this journey of like, wait a minute, like,
Right.
how, who am I? And so that's a real thing. He gave TED Talks and everything on it, but I kind of brought that into my character. That was one of the inspirations. And then sorry, did you want to go ahead?
No. Go ahead.
So as far as some of the other stuff, like I've always been interested in marine biology, and I was a travel writer for a long time. And then I was a science writer. So over the course of that, I'd had a little bit of exposure to that world. Like I did a journalism fellowship at an oceanographic institute at one point. So I was able to bring that in. And then to me, kind of one of the overarching themes of the book is the unintended consequences of new technologies, of shiny new technologies. So in the case of this book, there's someone who's trying to like commercialize nuclear fusion, which nobody's ever gotten there in real life, but some projects have gotten very close. And so fusion is essentially like, if it worked, it would be this like amazing, low cost, no carbon energy source. So the theme I was interested in is like, every time we come up with these things, like it could be used for great things. Like AI could advance medicine and humanitarian rescue. And then it could be, really bad. Like it could, it can be used to make weapons or all kinds of terrible accidental things can go on. So I was very interested in that theme. And that kind of came into like some of the more scientific angles in the book. So.
Yeah, I found it fascinating. I think a lot of times when you read a book or a novel, or maybe even traditionally, you end up observing a character. A lot of times you end up observing a character and kind of creating your own theories of like, what type of person is this? And I found it fascinating to place the character within this, wondering about herself, like in comparison. And, when we're talking about philosophical questions, it's like, what are you born with? Like talking about the person who saw the brain scan and be like, wait a second, like, how did I end up where I am? Like these are similar. They're the same. And it's such a fascinating question, I think, like within philosophy, who you are to be, what do you do? Like if you have these aspects or characteristics maybe that aren't pro-social, like do you acculturate yourself? And I was thinking when I was reading it too about like some of the things in research it shows about CEOs or the brains of CEOs and how they're a particular way, and things around empathy or execution. And so I thought it was such a unique aspect to like have that right up front and be like, oh, and to learn that history. And of course, to talk about the science of it all, right? Mm-hmm. If somebody has this disposition, and what do they end up doing, or what are the factors, nature, nurture?
Yeah, the age-old question. I was also very fascinated with psychopath or potentially psychopath CEOs from my days as a business journalist. I worked at Forbes magazine, and we were always putting like, Elizabeth Holmes was on the cover, and Adam Newman, that's the WeWork guy, and like kind of all these people who've maybe had brushes with the law later, like, they were these really celebrated entrepreneurs at one point. But, there's a reason psychopaths exist, and they may actually have a lot of strengths. Like if you want to, lead a charge into battle and risk your life, like you need someone who can be very impulsive or daring or unafraid, or, if you need a leader who's got to make hard decisions, like so, or a surgeon who, if you got to operate on somebody's brain, like you might be better off without too much empathy, because that could really throw you off. So I think, there's a reason that brains like this exist.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fascinating. And I enjoyed the role of water and oceans within the book. I'm from Rhode Island, the ocean state. I adore the ocean.
Mhm.
And one of the sensitivities I have, or like when I feel aspects of climate change or what's happening with the warming, I'm like really sensitive to oceans and my connection to that and feeling of that. And it was a great part of the book of kind of like understanding even towards the nuclear fusion of water being used towards those ends, and things like destruction, piracy, righteous groups, trying to fight against um, destruction. And I found it so thrilling. I wanted to ask you a question about you as a creator, as an artist, as a writer. I asked folks, was there a moment when you said, "Hey, I'm an artist," or you embodied that, or a writer, or how would you like to frame
Mhm.
that?
So I always loved, reading and writing and language and history and all those things. And then when I wanted to, have a career, I was like, okay, well, what can pay me to write? Because I love writing. And I became a journalist, which is a field that, I love and respect still. I don't do much journalism anymore because fiction is kind of all consuming. Um, and journalism is also kind of a trade, kind of you're kind of doing trade craft. And from there, I moved into writing nonfiction books. And I think that was the point where I felt like now I really get to create something of my own. Like I get to make something that is, of my vision. And then there was also kind of a piece of external validation, because when I started writing my first book and I got my first book contract, and like with a nonfiction book, you kind of pitch it on a proposal, and then like the publisher gives you an advance, and then you got to go write it. And I remember at that point, and I was still pretty young, and I had, which, it gave me enough money that like I could quit the job I was doing at that time. Um, and I realized, like filling out a passport form, like, what is your occupation? I was like, ooh, I'm a writer. Like
Yeah,
I can say I'm a writer officially now.
yeah,
That is literally what I am doing. It's both my passion and also my livelihood at this point. So that was, that is sort of external, but it was also like this big piece of like, yes, I can say this is what I do now. So that meant something to me.
yeah, yeah. Well, good on you. And I think there's, knowing, I've read the novel. I'm familiar with your nonfiction, but I think what was noticeable in what I read is the prominence of the female protagonist, and a complicated, like, human.
Mhm.
Like, I think that's really important to point out. That empowered human trying to figure things out, and there's great kind of autonomy and power within that comes through, and I really enjoyed that. I wanted to ask you another question, like the art question, and I think moving from nonfiction to fiction, and you creating this story in fiction, and talking about art. Um, you know, uh, your novel's a piece of art to me, both in enjoyment and all of it. What is art? Do you ponder, you grapple with that question in creativity? What is art?
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot, especially recently, I think. So art is an effort to communicate with others, with our fellow human beings, but it's an effort to communicate by non-literal means. I make art because I want to reach people so that they are moved or touched by what I've made. And it's a way to take, life can feel like a solo experience, and art is a way to take it and make it feel like a communal experience. But it's giving people a sensation or emotion that it can't come from, you can't just, add up all the words in my book and their literal dictionary definitions. It's something that comes through between the lines, and um, is more than the sum of its parts. And that's the same with music. We all respond more or less to different art forms. If you love visual art, there's something unquantifiable there that's not just about the paint strokes. If you love music, what's a piece of music, it's not just because you're, breaking down the notes or the beats. It's because it's giving you a feeling that you can't get from just the literal world. So as a creator, that's what art is to me. And I would also add, it's like, it comes from a need to externalize something inside of oneself. Like, I have all this in here and I need to get it out of me. And like, hopefully you will respond to that.
Yeah. What's your experience with the book of fiction? You talked about, things with the tour and appearances and things like that. What's it been like for you to create a work of fiction and then your baby's out in the world and you don't get the controller anymore? And what's that been like as far as the reciprocity or feedback with the reading audience?
Well, it's exciting when people relate to it, or they tell you like, I love that subject, or this meant something to me. Like, that's a great moment. And that's what's, one thing that's fun about getting out of your, solo world of writing, and like getting out and meeting people. So that part's really fun. Sorry, what was the rest of the question?
Well, it's just as you're getting feedback from others, right? Because like I think when we create something, like, we know what it is, and when our ideas are like, when you read it, I know this is what you're going to take away, and then somebody says completely something different.
No, I remember. So we have to, as a creator, like, once it's out of my hands, like, it's out there and it's going to mean different things to different people. And I have no more control over that. And people might take, there might be one little part that I haven't even thought about since I wrote it down 2 years ago. And they're like, that's what I really loved. Or, people, nobody no work, nothing is for everyone. But hopefully everything is for someone if you've made something good. So you just kind of have to make peace with the fact that it's done as far as you're concerned. And now it's going to be part of somebody else's life, and they're going to like have their own interpretation.
Yeah. Yeah. I enjoyed the part of the setting in the Pacific Northwest where I live, and I know you're in the region, and I'm from the East Coast originally. And one of the fun parts about it was, I had this experience of like listening to the book and some of the place locations, and I was like, oh, they're talking about my home, and I hadn't felt like that. So it was like really exciting for me. I've been out here long enough where I was like, oh, I know right where that is, and had this kind of like local feel to it, as set in the primary at the beginning in Washington State.
Yeah. So we have the big city. Yeah, you're an Oregonian now, right?
Yeah. Yes.
For a while
yes.
now. Yeah.
I think they'll allow me 13 years in. I think it's a lifetime or 2 generations in Oregon, but I'm 13 years in.
Yeah. Well, my mom was from Oregon, so maybe they would count me even then. And I have cousins in Oregon too, so I'm like maybe half an Oregonian. We have, so the beginning of the novel, we have the big city, Seattle, kind of very shiny, like biotech community. And then of course we have a couple scenes in the San Juan Islands, which you probably know about since you've been here, like a kind of harrowing sailing trip. And then the Institute, where our protagonist grew up, is like kind of just over the mountains over in Kashmir, Washington, which is maybe you've also heard of since you've
Yeah.
been here. I mean,
Yeah.
you've heard of the Cascades. I know that. So
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
you go over the mountains, and then there's like a bunch more of
I
our
couldn't.
states over there.
I couldn't. As a typical person moving out here, I was like, oh, I know what Oregon looks like, and then I was like, 2/3 of the state, the desert out there.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating geography. Anyways, I love the setting and uh, the interactions there. I wanted to ask you about travel. Travel's like prominent. I mean, you have a book about uh, travel. You've written about travel. I enjoy traveling, but I wanted to ask you, like, as a creator, has that impacted you as traveling and being in different areas? How has that had an impact on how you create or what you're able to create?
Oh yeah, massive impact. So my second book, which is called Wanderlust and came out about a decade ago, is a travel memoir. And of course, people are like, well, where is it a memoir about? So it's not just one place. It goes all over the world, from the South Pacific to the Middle East to Europe and so forth. And it's really a book about kind of obsessive travel and like the desire to travel. I mean, it's called Wanderlust, the
Yeah.
desire to stay on the road. And that was, a driving force in my life for many years, probably from, I don't know, college age, into my 30s. So it was really like defining and passionate for me. And Wanderlust is kind of a effort to understand that, like why, there's other people like that out in the world. And, why are we like that? Like, what's so important about moving into different cultures, or, going to things or coming from things? So, yeah, so that force in my life completely drove that second book and made that second book. So that's like a very direct, I mean, when you create a memoir, you are creating something, but it's also like, very directly and literally, it is your life. So that's what that book came out of. And, and I still love traveling, but I do it differently now. Like, it's a little more chill. Like, I am kind of always merging it with my life. Like, I'll go on a trip, but it's kind of a research trip, or, maybe I'm freelancing, or maybe I could, my husband and I have been going to Oaxaca, which is in southern Mexico, every winter now for a little while. And we kind of just take our little, turtle backpacks with us and work there. So it's part of my life now, but in a different way, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's such a powerful thing. I was a junior in high school, and like my family didn't travel. Like, I had never been on a plane or anything, and I ended up going on a class trip. I guess I was a senior in high school, first time overseas and everything like that. And I never knew why I did it. Like, I'm like, how do you end up? And so I've always thought about this, like, whatever that is inside of me that was so prominent, where I really didn't even have the means. I had to scrape together, pull everything out, and then went to Spain. It was such a pivotal type of thing, but I didn't even understand it at the time, or that drive to see something there. I understand it a lot better now. And I find, even in this region in Oregon, one of the great pleasures in my life is that this whole area, I drive around a lot, I travel a lot and work and otherwise. And there's such incredible beauty. Like, I know now that I'll never quite get used to that, or the adventure of taking off or driving through California. I think about it a lot because out on the East Coast, there's this like fantasy about what the West Coast is, and I've never really dropped it. Like, I don't know if it's fantasy reality, but I've never dropped it because I enjoy it in that way. Like, I know I'm in California, I know I'm on that coast road, and I'm like, this is cool. That energy's never left. So I look at travel and going to different places such a stimulation, and my brain, like intelligence, like it just, I feel smarter and more alive. I think I said smarter. That would have been my East
That's
Coast
very,
accent.
yeah, very Rhode Island.
There's a lot of smart. Yeah, I don't do that often on the podcast, although somebody's listening to say he's always dropping it. That, yeah, it's a lot smarter after I'm, driving. But I just really get a thrill out of that, and I think in seeing your work and in the fiction, I love to do that. I listen to the audio book, which I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I read a lot of books. My goodness, everybody, what a perform! It was a lovely performance.
Oh yeah. I'm
The
so
folks-
glad. Yeah. I'm glad to hear you love the audiobook because I love the actors. They had 4 voice actors, and I think they did a terrific job. And I felt pretty lucky that my publisher decided to do a multi-person cast.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You don't always get that.
No.
And I thought that was really neat. And then also I got to be a little bit involved. So I got to listen to the audition tapes and kind of say, oh, this sounds like Kate and this sounds like Luciana.
Yeah.
So, so that was fun for me, and I think they did a great job. So
I don't mean to overlook that, and we'll put the talent in the show notes. Yeah. I just wanted to convey that to you because it's a different experience reading and listening. But I actually had that when I first started listening. I'm like, oh my gosh, the voice switch, which doesn't happen all the time. Yeah. And sometimes people do marvelous. I mean, I think the person who does Harry Potter does 800 voices, and it does them all incredibly.
They get those classically trained British actors.
Oh my gosh.
And some of them, like in certain detective novels, and boy, they just do every single accent. And some of them are very, very good. That's true.
Yeah, so everybody, if you enjoy the book, obviously you get a copy of it, but I listened to the audiobook, and it's really worth the performance, and not knowing what you think those folks sounded with, like in your head, it's interesting that you had a role of being like, oh, I think that's him or her, but great kudos to those voice performers on the audiobook, Outlier. I wanted to ask you the big question. I never forget to ask the big question, but the question I asked in the title of the show is, why is there something rather than nothing?
So I think a lot of people define science and religion as being very much opposite to one another. One is facts and proof, and one is faith. But I don't think they're actually mutually exclusive. Einstein famously said, I want to know God's thoughts. That's just the ultimate fusion of a scientific thinker and God. So here's how that relates to your question. So there's a very literal answer to your question, which is there was a big bang, and there's a one single point, and then it exploded, and we live in an expanding universe, and that's the Big Bang Theory. And it's, I think it's a pretty good theory. It's the best one we have. And, maybe scientists will be able to empirically prove it one day. But then we'll still have the question of, well, why did that happen? And that's where faith comes back in, or you can call it faith, or you can call just there are unknowns. We can't explain on everything or understand everything. So, what created that point that blew up and created our universe? So you kind of, if you want to answer the question, why is there something rather than nothing? Even if you can, explain and explain and explain with, this scientific bent that I have, you still have to just believe maybe in a creator, as in traditional monotheistic religions or most religions. So that's how I would answer that question.
Yeah, I like your discussion science. I mean, I think it's so fascinating. Philosophy, science, religion in around this question as well. Is like, and I in the show I connected to like this just this idea of creativity or this spark, or why does something begin? And I love it with creators because it's always a bit different, and sometimes folks seeing like whether they create something, it's something that they have to create, like it has to manifest, or folks maybe you feel like in the creation mode that there was no thing before, and look, I did these type of things, or you arranged the words in this particular way to to create something. Talking about fiction. All right, so you write the fiction book, love it. You have that out there. For you as a creator, does that now place you in a position of like, what's the next book? Are you thinking still fiction? Like, what did it do to expand out your head of now that you got that one out in the world?
Yeah. I would like to say that maybe I have the hang of fiction now. So, knock on wood. I transitioned from nonfiction to fiction, and that was like a long, slow kind of relearning process. And I am creating something new now. In fact, I have been for a while because traditional publishing is actually very slow, like incredibly slow. So this novel was like locked down, like the text was locked down probably in, I think, December. And then it came out in August. So I've been working on another novel, which is, I mean, for me, that first creation phase is very exciting, and it's very much my happy place, the way I'm in the flow, the place where I'm like in the flow and content is when I am creating. So, I've kind of written, kind of like on a second draft ish. It's hard to count drafts because if you sort of write 3/4 and then you go back to the beginning, or you're on a second draft. But so I'm writing a completely different story. It's not a sequel. And with my book coming out, I kind of have to toggle a little bit. Like I have to think about the Outlier, and then I also have to like switch back and think about the new novel. So this is a good time that, I've been able to get back to it now in the last few weeks, because there was like 7 weeks in the summer that I didn't write anything, or I didn't write any fiction. So I'm getting back to that. I'm enjoying it. But I also feel a sense of urgency, but I think that's sort of like a cosmic urgency. Like, if I want to make or create all this work in my lifetime, I gotta keep on that. I gotta like keep putting things out into the world more than like a practical level urgency.
Yeah. And that can be such a big drive. Being a book lover myself, and getting aging a little bit more, getting a bit older, and like having these books around and being like, I've in my head with books, I'm like, I don't want to die before I read that one. That's why I have it. Like I like, I gotta read the Three Musketeers or something. I haven't read that. I was supposed to read that, like that type of thing. And when you say urgency, I think about that. I think about that a lot, and maybe as a creator too, of like, you had that book in you, but then you're like, oh my gosh, I did that, and now it's your first book, and it's interesting to hear, how your brain goes to the next one. But how big of a change was it creatively going from nonfiction to fiction?
Bigger than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
So I was a journalist, and then I wrote a couple memoirs or nonfiction. And so the first novel I started after Wanderlust came out, my travel memoir. I thought I wanted it to be in the first person, like all in the first person, because I thought, well, that'll create a sense of intimacy. Like, you will feel like you're with this narrator and going through things with her. And so I wrote that novel, never sold it. But in retrospect, it's like, it's really hard to do that in a work of fiction, because if you're entirely in the first person, the audience can't know anything that the protagonist doesn't know, which
Yeah.
like, if you want to have a plot, and like, I like a plot, that's very tricky. That's very tricky.
Yeah.
It's very hard to like create any sense of mystery when like you can only know what the main character knows. So when I started The Outlier, I was much more open to like, oh, I'm gonna have a few voices in this. So that was one thing I learned. Going from journalism to fiction is a big change, like depending on what kind of journalism you're writing. But like a lot of it, if it's like news, breaking news or daily news, like there's a certain style to that, right? Like it's very fact-based, kind of choppy. Like a story can be like fact, quote, fact, quote. And you're trying to like sort of show you have all the evidence and all the facts and just like get that out there in the most efficient way possible. And when you're writing fiction, you can't do that at all. Like it'll just feel like an info dump onto the reader if you're like, here's all the facts that I know about this, right? So you have to be much more judicious and like just let the language flow and just like choose the right detail here and there, but you're not trying to give evidence to the reader that like I know a lot of things. But there's some things that transition really well. Like I think journalists have a good ear for dialogue, and so you can bring that over to fiction and hopefully write good dialogue. Journalists I think have a good sense of like detail for setting, so that's something that transitions over well. So there's pros and cons of making the switch in terms of like what you have to relearn, but then also what still applies. So like I know you write in like communications in your day job, right? Like
well, yeah. Union guy. Yep.
Yeah. So I feel like doing, any kind of like day job communications writing, it's sort of like word calisthenics. Like you become very good at like just, using words, I guess, for lack of any other.
Absolutely.
You know what you're doing. You know how to, evoke or communicate, and obviously that all is hugely helpful for creative writing.
I love writing grievances. I do it all the time. No, I on that point too, sometimes I do a lot of things creatively. I want to write more than I do. And then sometimes I forget that, like, I remind myself, give myself some space and say, shit, Ken, you're writing all the time and every day. It isn't. And so I think that was a realization for me, though, that there is this deep craft that I've developed in a particular way. So it's just reminding myself, it's not like I'm not doing it. I'm doing it in a way creatively and deep thought. So just residing in that a bit more. I wanted to ask you one more writing question. And maybe it's a little bit more typical, but, you're writing and if you're getting stuck in an area or you're getting caught up, did you call back to maybe other writers, other creators to be like, maybe how they solve this problem, maybe I can solve it that way? Did you engage in that type of process?
Yes, definitely. So when I was figuring out the different characters and the kinds of voices I wanted to have in The Outlier, I remembered a book that I loved. It's a novel from 5-10 years ago called Euphoria. Very good novel. Very loosely based on an episode in the life of Margaret Mead, if that interests you. Mm-hmm. But I happened to remember that, like, wait, she did a thing where she had 3 different voices, and one was in the first person and 2 were in the close third person. It's like, well, if she can do that, I can do that.
Yeah.
So that was something I took. It's kind of like if you see someone stick a backflip, then I think, well, maybe I can stick a backflip like that. In the new novel I'm writing, I want to have a play within the novel. Like there's a character who's a playwright and she's, trying to get her play out there. And I've been trying to figure out like, well, how do you do that? And like, do I just want to talk about it or do I want to have like lines of script in there? There's kind of all these sort of, narrative and logistical questions. So I have in mind a couple things people have recommended that are, novels with plays or something else embedded within them. So I'm going to go read those and like say like, how did they do it? And yeah. So there's stuff like that.
No, I love that. I adore books. Really on your book too, you stuck the backflip. Folks, seriously, it's I get a thrill out of encountering different types of work in fiction, and it's a hell of a book, and I'm really happy to know that you're continuing along the path in writing fiction. Can you tell the listeners, where to find your works, and if there's any appearances, anything? We're talking here in September 2024, but just like, how do we encounter your art, your books?
Sure. So you can find the Outlier at any of your favorite online retailers, at a lot of bricks and mortar retailers. Online, I like bookshop.org online, but any of the usual places. And my website is pretty easy if you know my name. It's ElisabethEaves.com, and that's Elizabeth with an S, and that's Eaves like in the word eavesdrop. So ElisabethEaves.com, and then there you'll also find links to the Outlier, but also to my previous books, Bear and Wanderlust, and stuff about them. I do a newsletter, so it was monthly and now it's sort of quarterly because anyway. But I talk about basically travel and writing, like either together or apart. So sometimes travel writing, and as far as social media, I basically use Instagram and not the other ones, and that's just at Elisabeth Eaves. So I'll have updates and places I've been and what I'm up to and stuff on there. So
congratulations on the book, and folks too. I tell folks about this, Elisabeth. They get a bookstore a couple blocks away. I'm in Albany, Oregon, Browser's Bookstore, and all the guests that I have on, Abe, our bookshop owner, gets those books over there. So Browser's Bookstore in Albany will have Elisabeth's book as well as other guests. But I wanted to thank you for your art, Elisabeth, and being able to chat with you. I have an excitement because there are additional questions that are popping up in my head, and I really enjoyed the intelligence of the book, and it shows like an intelligent work of fiction doesn't have to be. It can be like exciting, thrilling, sexy, like complicated. It can be like adventurous. It can be all those things, and you got that there in your book. So thank you for the Outlier and all the work you do.
Well, thank you. Thank you for those kind words. I really appreciate it. And thanks for your great podcast. I mean, I love the way you kind of open up philosophical ideas to, in a very accessible way, I think, for anybody to listen to or understand. So it's been very cool. Very fun conversation. So
thank you, Elisabeth. Everybody, again, I've recommended it 2-3 times. Elisabeth Eaves' work, and if you want a great fall read, if you're sitting chilly inside or whatever, you can blanket, grab the Outlier, or my goodness, like I said, listen to it. What a great performance! And a shout out to the team that put together the audiobook. Thanks again, Elisabeth, and I look forward to reading more of your words.
Cool. Thank you.
This is Something Rather Than Nothing.
And listeners, to stay connected with us and our guests, visit somethingratherthannothing.com. Join our mailing list for exclusive updates and access to guest-created art. If you enjoyed this episode or any episode, please like, subscribe, leave a review on your podcast platform. People really read that shit. Your support helps us reach more listeners and spread our community across the planet. This is a global show, and we like to give a shout out to our many listeners across the world, including many listeners in Canada, Spain, Germany, UK, Argentina, Brazil, India, Thailand, and so many more places. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Something Rather Than Nothing Podcast for behind the scenes content. And the best way to help the show is to tell your friends about us. If you love it, they'll love it too. Tell your friends who love it. We love you. This is Something Rather Than Nothing Podcast.